What is the purpose of life? Why do we exist if everything is destined to end? What happens after death? How can anyone truly live in a world so full of suffering? These are questions that, sooner or later, touch every human being, and they become even more haunting when asked by those who seemingly have it all: wealth, success, and family. This was the case of Lev Tolstoy, one of the greatest writers of all time. Despite his fame and fortune, he plunged into one of the deepest existential crises ever recorded. His journey is not just about literature, but about the search for meaning itself. The early years. Tolstoy was born in 1828 into a wealthy Russian aristocratic family. Orphaned young, he inherited the immense Yasnaya Polyana estate, along with hundreds of serfs. From early on, he lived in contradiction. He indulged in gambling, drinking, and fleeting romances, but he also kept personal diaries where he meticulously recorded his faults and made strict plans for self-improvement. His early works, Childhood, Boyhood, and the Cossacks, reflected his experiences from carefree youth to his military service in the Crimean War. Success came quickly, and he was welcomed into the literary circles of Moscow and St. Petersburg. But despite recognition, Tolstoy felt like an outsider, restless, divided, never fully at peace. At 30, he returned to his estate seeking deeper meaning. He married Sophia Burse, and together they raised 13 children. It was during this time that he wrote War and Peace, an epic masterpiece that cemented him as one of the greatest writers in history. Yet even in the comfort of family life and the glory of artistic triumph, he felt a growing emptiness. Nothing, not fame, not wealth, not love, could silence the question gnawing at his heart: what is the meaning of it all? The crisis. At 50, Tolstoy entered the darkest period of his life. What once brought him joy, his family, his writing, his success, suddenly seemed empty. Days lost their color, and nights became unbearable. Sleep was his only escape from the weight of despair. He described this struggle in his confessional work, A Confession, where he revealed the most painful truth. He contemplated ending his own life. The thought haunted him constantly. He admitted that he distracted himself with trivialities only to avoid taking a final step into the void. This was not just a personal crisis. It was an intellectual and spiritual battle, and Tolstoy refused to turn away. He confronted the greatest questions of existence head-on. Searching for answers. Tolstoy turned first to philosophy. He studied Socrates, Buddha, and Schopenhauer, but instead of relief, their wisdom deepened his despair. Socrates gave rational insights, but reason alone felt too cold. Buddha spoke of renunciation, but Tolstoy's heart resisted detachment. Schopenhauer described life as meaningless suffering, which only magnified his fears. Unsatisfied, Tolstoy turned to science. He studied Darwin and modern biology, hoping empirical answers would ease his doubt. Instead, science left him colder still. According to Darwin, life was simply the product of chance, a biological accident, destined for decay. Science explained how the world worked, but not why it existed. Philosophy seemed too pessimistic. Science seemed too indifferent. Both failed to fill the void. The 4 ways people live. In his search, Tolstoy observed how others confronted life's absurdity. He identified 4 common approaches: ignoring the problem, living daily life without ever questioning deeper meaning, escaping into pleasure, drowning doubts in wealth, comfort, and distractions, choosing despair, seeing death as the only way out of suffering, or living in limbo, acknowledging life's absurdity but doing nothing about it. Tolstoy studied these paths carefully. Each had truth, but none provided lasting peace. None gave him a real answer. A turning point. The breakthrough came not from books or theories, but from observing ordinary people. Farmers, laborers, and peasants, people who lived with hardship every day, carried within them a serenity he could not explain. Despite poverty and suffering, they endured with dignity. Their secret was faith. Tolstoy began to realize that meaning was not something found in abstract ideas, nor in material success, but in the quiet strength of belief. Faith, he discovered, was not a way of escaping life, but of embracing it fully. It was the only force that could turn suffering into purpose. The transformation. From that point forward, Tolstoy's life changed. He abandoned much of his wealth, gave up luxuries, and sought to live simply. He devoted himself to others and embraced a spirituality that emphasized compassion, humility, and authenticity. What philosophy and science had failed to give him, faith provided. Peace. Tolstoy's legacy. Tolstoy's story teaches us something timeless. The meaning of life cannot be found in pleasure, knowledge, or success alone. It is found in how we live, how we love, and how we endure. It is found in the ability to look beyond despair and see hope where reason alone cannot. It is found in the courage to face suffering, not as a punishment, but as a teacher. Tolstoy's crisis was not his downfall, it was his awakening. Closing thought. So what about us? We may never write epics like War and Peace, but like Tolstoy, we all face questions that cannot be ignored. Why are we here? What really matters? How do we live when life itself seems fragile? Perhaps the answer is simpler than we think. Perhaps it is not in wealth or success or recognition, but in the quiet strength of faith, whatever form that faith may take. Because meaning is not something handed to us, it is something we choose to live. That is Tolstoy's lesson, and maybe it is the lesson we all need. The questions that haunt us all. What is the purpose of life? Why do we exist if everything is destined to end? What happens after death? How can anyone truly live in a world so full of suffering? Sooner or later, these questions come to every human being. They are not reserved for the poor, the desperate, or the broken. They come to kings as much as to beggars, to philosophers as much as to ordinary workers. And perhaps the most haunting thing is this. Sometimes those who seem to have everything, wealth, success, family, admiration, are the ones most shaken by them. This is exactly what happened to Leo Tolstoy, one of the greatest writers in human history. His story is not just about literature or Russia or art. It is about the universal human search for meaning. Early life, a child of privilege and contradiction. Leo Tolstoy was born in 1828 into a wealthy, aristocratic Russian family. His childhood, however, was shadowed by loss. Orphaned young, he inherited the vast Yasnaya Polyana estate, along with hundreds of serfs who worked the land. From the beginning, Tolstoy's life was marked by contradiction. On one hand, he indulged in gambling, drinking, and fleeting romances. On the other, he kept meticulous diaries in which he recorded his faults and created strict plans for self-improvement. These dual impulses, toward indulgence and toward self-discipline, never left him. They would become the very fabric of his inner struggle. His early works, like Childhood, Boyhood, and the Cossacks, drew from his own experiences, tracing the journey from innocence to restless adulthood, from privilege to the harsh realities of military service during the Crimean War. Tolstoy's talent was undeniable. Success came quickly. He was welcomed into the intellectual and literary circles of Moscow and St. Petersburg. And yet, despite the recognition, he remained restless, never at peace, always sensing something was missing. Marriage, family, and masterpieces. At 30, Tolstoy withdrew from society and returned to his estate in search of something deeper. He married Sophia Burrs, and together they would have 13 children. During this time, he wrote War and Peace, a monumental masterpiece that captured not just the events of history, but the inner lives of its characters. Later, he would write Anna Karenina, another triumph of psychological depth and narrative power. By any measure, Tolstoy had everything a man could desire: fame, fortune, family, and artistic immortality. And yet the nagging emptiness remained. Not wealth, not love, not even genius could silence the haunting question within him: what is the meaning of it all? The crisis. At 50, Tolstoy fell into one of the darkest periods of his life. What once gave him joy, his family, his writing, his success, suddenly seemed hollow. Days lost their color, and nights became unbearable. Sleep was his only escape. In his brutally honest work, A Confession, Tolstoy revealed the extent of his despair. He admitted he contemplated ending his own life. The thought haunted him daily. He would hide ropes and avoid hunting trips, fearing he might use them to escape his torment. This was not just a personal crisis. It was a spiritual and intellectual earthquake. Tolstoy was unwilling to simply push the questions aside. He confronted them directly, determined to find an answer or die trying. Searching for answers. Tolstoy turned first to philosophy. He studied Socrates, who offered rational insights, but reason alone felt cold, detached, insufficient. He studied Buddha, whose teachings of renunciation fascinated him, but his restless heart resisted complete detachment. He studied Schopenhauer, who declared life meaningless suffering, but this only magnified Tolstoy's fears. Unsatisfied, Tolstoy turned to science. He studied Darwin and modern biology, hoping empirical answers would soothe his doubt. Instead, he found only greater emptiness. Science explained how life worked, but not why it existed. Philosophy seemed too pessimistic. Science seemed too indifferent. Both left the void unfilled. The four ways people live. Tolstoy began to observe the people around him, analyzing how they coped with the absurdity of life. He identified four common approaches: ignoring the problem, living daily life without ever asking deeper questions, escaping into pleasure, drowning doubts with wealth, comfort, and distractions, choosing despair, concluding death is the only way out, living in limbo, acknowledging life's absurdity but doing nothing to resolve it. Each path had some truth, but none satisfied him. None could bring peace. A turning point. The breakthrough came not from books, but from observing ordinary people: peasants, farmers, laborers. These men and women, who faced poverty and hardship every day, lived with a quiet serenity Tolstoy could not explain. They endured suffering without despair. They lived without wealth or fame, yet carried a strength he lacked. Their secret was faith. Faith gave their lives meaning. Faith gave them the courage to face suffering with dignity. For Tolstoy, this was a revelation. Meaning, he realized, was not to be found in abstract philosophy or scientific theories, nor in material success. It was found in the simple, unshakable faith that life has purpose beyond what the mind alone can grasp. Transformation. From that moment, Tolstoy's life began to change. He renounced much of his wealth, gave up his aristocratic luxuries, and embraced a life of simplicity. He wore plain clothes, ate simply, and worked the land with his peasants. He poured himself into helping others, emphasizing compassion, humility, and authenticity. What philosophy and science had failed to give him, faith provided. Peace. Legacy. Tolstoy's journey teaches us something timeless. The meaning of life cannot be found in pleasure, knowledge, or success alone. It is found in how we live, how we love, how we endure suffering. It is found in the ability to face suffering not as punishment, but as a teacher. It is found in the quiet strength of faith. Tolstoy's crisis was not the end of him, it was his awakening. Closing reflection. And what about us? We may never write epics like War and Peace. We may never command estates or shape world literature. But like Tolstoy, we face the same questions. Why are we here? What really matters? How do we live when life itself seems fragile? Perhaps the answer is simpler than we think. Meaning is not handed to us from the outside. It is something we choose to live. Not in wealth, not in success, not in recognition, but in love, in compassion, in faith, whatever form that faith may take. This was Tolstoy's lesson, and maybe it is the lesson we all need.